Let's kickstart. Very German time. So, hi everyone. A very warm welcome to this session about anticipatory action in times of conflict. On behalf of the Anticipation Hub, the German Red Cross and the Red Cross Climate Center and GPPI, we give you a very warm welcome to this event. We're very excited to be part of the Berlin Security and Conflict Conference. We feel really happy that we will be able to share some of the work that we have been doing in the Red Cross, Red Crescent on anticipatory action, more particularly in focus-based financing. And it would be just fantastic to have such a diverse audience basically to have not only for us to share some of the work that we are doing, but also to have a lot of your feedback. So first of all, my name is Catalina Jaime. I'm the Senior Risk Advisor of Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate. And together with me is Lisa, who is going to join me in the moderation of this event. So Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Warm welcome to everyone also from my side. My name is Lisa Sauerhammer. I work for the German Red Cross here at the headquarters in Berlin. And yes, very excited and happy to see you all and to have the session with you.
Good. So to kickstart the session, we're going to ask you a few little questions that will be great if you answer in the chat. So we get a little bit of a sense of who is in the virtual room. And will help us to facilitate the discussion. So the first question, very quick, could you write in the chat from which city which city are you sitting down now? So we can have a little sense of where is everyone? Okay, so we have definitely lots of Germany, Hamburg, Addis, great. Dhaka, Ashaful is in Dhaka, Düsseldorf, great. Perfect. I'm based in London. Great. We have Bogota, my city. Excellent. Good. So we have a good diversity. Excellent. Maputo. Silvia from WFP. Great. Let's wait for a few others to write their cities down. So we can have a good sense of who do we have from where. Excellent. So now let's move on to our next question. Lisa, what is our next question? Are you in mute, Lisa?
Sorry for that. The question is, what are you excited about in this session, Catalina?
Good. Okay, so you asked me about me. Okay, so to kickstart this. So in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and in general in the humanitarian sector, we have been working in the last few years on a concept called focus-based financing. Basically, how can we act ahead of disasters? How can we do effectively early action? But one of the big issues, the question marks, is how could we able to do actually anticipatory action in context of conflict, in situations of conflict. So basically this session is going to be about that. It's going to be about an exploration about this specific concept. And my dear friend Marie Wagner from GPPI and me, we're going to launch today a paper that we have been writing out this yeyear, which kind of bring about some of these key research questions. So that's what I'm very excited about. Oh, sorry, we have some, okay, good. So another question, Lisa, that I wanted to ask the participants is about their organization. So could you write on the chat from which organization are you, which organization do you work for? So we can have also a different sense. Okay, so you can help me, Lisa, to pronounce that. Aktion Deutschland Hilft. German Red Cross.
Aktion Deutschland hilft, yes. Welthungerhilfe, also German.
Great, we have our friends from Forewarn, WFP, GPPI, PEAK, excellent. Let's wait for a few others so we can have a general sense. Great, General Command Military Forces of Colombia, fantastic. IOM, GIZ. Great. This is fantastic because one of the objectives of today is that we're gonna have a series of like presentations, but we're gonna also have like some like more work, like some breakout groups for some specific discussions. So it's fantastic to see this diversity of people. Good. Lisa, is there something else that you would like to add?
Yeah, another question to you, actually, Catalina. What are we going to see in this session now?
Good, excellent. So we're gonna have different Caroline moments. So we're gonna kickstart the event with an introduction from Matthias Aimli, who is the desk officer for anticipatory action, the German Foreign Office, who has been working on anticipatory action already for 5 years, and he's gonna give us a background of like why this specific topic of anticipatory action in context of a conflict is crucial. Then I'm going to take you through a description and explanation of what focus-based financing is about, so you can have a little bit of the sense of the work that we have been doing. And then Mary and me will take you through the highlights from the paper. And then after, we're going to do some like really interactive exercise to finalize. And then Alexander Ruth, the head of the Anticipation Hub of the German Red Cross, is going to wrap up the session and is going to talk about the very exciting new hub that we are launching this year called the Anticipation Hub. And that basically is going to be the session that we have today. And we welcome you to write, please, any questions or comments that you have in the chat. So we will make sure that through the whole session, we will be able to address any of the comments and questions that you have. Good. Something else to add, Lisa?
No, thanks, Matthias. Exciting for your presentation.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot. It won't be much of a presentation, rather some remarks, and I don't plan to steal too much of our time that we can have in the real expert discussions and in our discussion in the big group. But it's really a pleasure for me to see, at least virtually, a lot of familiar faces, though at the same time not all familiar, which is also good, because otherwise I would be only preaching to the converted in a way. On behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office, I would like to thank the organizers, thank GPPI and German Red Cross and the Climate Center for organizing this important event, because as part of the Berlin Climate and Security Conference, I believe this is really can underline the crucial role of early action, of anticipatory action, and within humanitarian assistance, and in particular, and I think that's our focus today, and it's really exciting for me to discuss how this relates to conflict that we want to discuss for a long time, and I think we are getting there step by step. I was asked actually to provide short remarks on the importance and added value of anticipatory approaches, or FBF, from the perspective of the Federal Foreign Office. So bear with me for the ones who are the regular anticipation audience, that might be like stating the obvious in some bits, but that's also good, I think, because we make this concept known more and more. So generally, German humanitarian assistance places a great emphasis on something that we call paradigm shift towards a forward-looking humanitarian system. So we've repeatedly pronounced that still in too many cases and too often disasters seem to just take us off guard, disasters that we could have known about and we could have acted upon earlier, using all these increasing availability of risk and forecasting information. Recently, this year, I read a study of ODI for Start Network that was suggesting that at least 55% of crises are somewhat predictable. That's actually more than half. So I think we strongly believe that this increased capacity to anticipate things and to forecast also comes with a responsibility. If we know a disaster is about to strike or a crisis is imminent, we cannot just sit and wait. There's a moral imperative to act, and that's something that we discuss from time to time about all the efficiency and the effectiveness of early action, and that's true and that's great, but it's not only that. It would even be the right thing if it was more costly, which is it is not, so that's great. So what we need to start asking is, why not acting early? So there was, when we set up to do this, there was a gap between the common reactive humanitarian assistance, which, don't get me wrong, that's very important. We need the reactive humanitarian assistance again and again and again. But between that and the general preparedness activities that prepare communities, stakeholders generally. But we wanted to make use of a window of opportunity that's in between that, and that acts on the specific forecasts. So that provides a time, lead time in which we can do things already. About 6 years ago, I believe, we collectively launched the Federal Foreign Office Climate Action Plan and set out to connect mainly 3 elements: to connect early warning and forecasts that get better and better, but they need to be somehow connected to the early action. So the early action needs to be planned. We need to understand which are the good early actions and where to do it for what hazard. And these planned actions can come together, for example, in what FPF calls the early action protocols. And then this needs to be connected to financing. So we need financing systems, instruments that can finance such early actions. And the draft by the Red Cross, same like the anticipation window of the start fund or the SURF of OCHA, they are examples where more and more this becomes a possibility to actually connect financing to these early actions that are prepared for. And since then, I think we are constantly improving, actually. The main anticipation players, like many of yourselves and several donors like us, like DFID, the UK, it's not DFID anymore, they join forces in moving this anticipatory risk financing agenda into the right direction, including new coordination and collaboration initiatives. We have the Anticipation Hub here in the group, the Early Action Focus Task Force, Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, all of that is extremely encouraging, I have to say. But we'll need to continue specifically broadening the range of hazards that we are looking at and for which the anticipatory action can work. And this is a bit like avoiding a hydromet bias. I think we have very good experience now in hydrometeorological forecasts and how to build early action on those. But we want to scale up, and that scale up does not only mean more of the same, but also difference. And that's one of the reasons why we discuss here as well conflict. And I think also COVID-19 actually reminded us that in many cases, we just need to broaden the scope of hazards that we are looking at. And therefore, I'm extremely excited about the think piece that was just published by GPBI and the Climate Center. I think that's a great step into really getting a bit depth into this discussion. And I hope it will help us all here in the group in this session and later on to discuss the challenges for both doing anticipation in conflict, so what we might call conflict proofing of early action protocols or things like that. At the same time, also seeing if it's possible to do anticipation on conflict, or more precise, maybe on conflict impacts. Therefore, finally, without further ado, I think I'll hand over to the great group of experts that comes now, which will guide us through all this event. And I'm sure that it will both contribute to sharpening the momentum on the anticipatory action agenda in general, and it will also help us to explore ways in which anticipatory action can become even more relevant than it is now in conflict settings. And with this, I'll close and am happy to listen and discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So, I think it's fascinating, as Matthias was saying, through the years, how the concept of anticipatory action is evolving. And we're getting to a point, we really want to broaden, the analysis of how interact in other type of crises where we haven't necessarily acted, but also integrating the aspect of the complexity of particularly acting in fragile and conflict contexts. So now, the next part of our session, I'm gonna actually share with you my screen. We're gonna present to you a video that describes what focus-based financing is. So you can have a sense of exactly, what is the type of work that we're doing. So let me just try to put this very briefly, and I'm just gonna make sure that you can hear. Let me just make sure. Perfect, so there we go.
Reaction, not anticipation. This is how disaster response works today. Cyclones, extreme snowfalls, floods. Every year, disasters cause thousands of deaths and destroy livelihoods all over the world. Until now, people only received help after a disaster had already taken its toll. This is what we want to change with forecast-based financing. Using forecast models and satellite data, experts can predict the probability of extreme weather events with increasing accuracy. Forecast-based financing uses scientifically determined early warning indicators to decide when, where, and how resources are mobilized and funds are released, so that early actions can be taken to reduce harm. This approach links a network of scientists and our profound know-how in disaster response to reduce risks and enhance preparedness before a disaster occurs. For example, once a forecast reaches a high threshold of probability that a cyclone will hit the coast, resources are distributed automatically so that predefined early actions can be taken to protect the population. Emergency shelters will be set up, medical kits, food and clean water provided, and people evacuated. By anticipating rather than reacting, we will save the lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable people. This mechanism for forecast-based action is integrated into our Disaster Relief Emergency Fund, short DREF, supported by governments, institutional and private donors. The Red Cross Red Crescent movement is the pioneer in disaster response worldwide. With forecast-based financing, we continue along this path, united in a mission of saving lives, promoting dignity, and leaving no one behind. To learn more, visit forecastbasedfinancing.org.
Great. Yeah, so with that video, you have a little bit of an idea, like basically the work on focus-based financing that we have been doing during the last years. But what is important is that, it's not only the Red Cross and Red Crescent that has been really doing this work, it's across the entire humanitarian sector. So we have, for instance, the START network that is as well like investing and doing a lot of work in anticipatory humanitarian action, but as well different UN agencies. So this is a joint work definitely that is happening. So just before we move into the specific topic of anticipatory action in conflict, I'm going to take you through some few details about what focus-based financing is. So you can you will be able to kind of link the dots in a much better way. So just going very, very briefly, as in the video, you could here. So basically, focus-based financing is a mechanism that allows the disbursement of automatic funding based on a specific trigger, so organizations can do early action. And this is quite revolutionary because as you, I guess many of you are familiar with early warning systems. We have been doing early warning systems for years and years and years, but there were many, many gaps in early warning systems. So what we have done over the last years is to kind of understand what those gaps are to make sure that early action is really possible, that early action is really effective and that really reach the population that it should reach. So few of the key elements of these focus-based financing systems that we have been developing and improving are the ones that you can see in this slide. On one side, what we call the triggers, which is basically the decision-making process, what allowed us to know when do we need to act, where do we need to act, who is more likely to be impacted. Then also are the actions to really do something that will really reduce risks. So it's not, we're not talking about just actions about response once the disasters are happening, but it's actually thinking ahead of like, no, like what are those impacts that could happen and what can we do effectively to reduce those impacts. And then very importantly is the financing mechanism aspect, because one of the reasons why early warning systems for many years in a way did not like fail or didn't really work is because there was no financing mechanism that could be triggered based on a forecast. And that is like quite revolutionary. And together with all this is of course not like the need for the action planning process, which we call it early action protocols of other agencies, not like we call them like advanced contingency plans. So these are the key elements of the system that we use. There are several types of steps that we need to do to be able to set up those systems. And this is particularly relevant for this conference because the Berlin Security and Climate and Security Conference is quite focused on the part of the use of risk analysis and risk assessments. So we wanted actually to bring you a little bit into deep, like why risk assessment is such an important element of these anticipatory systems. And with this, I'm going to go into the details of like how is the decision-making process and the role of the risk assessments within this focus-based financing process. So one of the kind of like key concepts to be able to decide when and where we are going to act is for impact-based forecasting. And this is basically a process in which we combined weather forecast with risk information. So it's really literally like understanding exactly which are the forecasts that are available that we could use for different type of hydrometeorological hazards, like understanding the skills, how good they are, at which scales, together with the information of risk analysis. And that really goes very deep of understanding historical impact of disasters, who has been affected in the past, who is very likely to be affected in the future. Like, of course, a very deep analysis of exposure and vulnerability. And then together with this information, we have the key like pieces of the puzzle that will help us to take the decisions to act early. So this actually offers a lot of opportunities, like for kind of like looking into anticipatory action from a broader perspective, even for other hazards, which is what we're going to discuss today. Now, so basically as a part of this decision-making process, we really do a deep analysis of these impact levels. So at which point, like a disaster is a disaster and who is going to be impacted. So there's a lot of like deep analysis to really be able to get this right. The other key element that I mentioned initially is the financing mechanism. So this has been actually a remarkable work that we have been doing, which is setting up a funding mechanism that can be automatically triggered. And for this, the German government has been like a champion in all this process, because it has actually supported humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross and others to set up this system. So the Red Cross at the moment has a funding mechanism that any Red Cross in the world can access to do early action. That didn't exist 3 years ago. So this is quite remarkable in terms of the evolution of this topic. And another critical aspect, just to finalize, is the action planning, because I guess many of you will wonder, but I mean, what exactly can we do? Like what are we talking about in terms of actions? And this is an example, like for instance, in Peru, there is a focus-based financing system that is really focused on reducing the mortality and morbidity of alpacas. And the hazard in this case is a cold wave and snowfall. So there is a whole system that allowed us to use that forecast and risk analysis to do different type of actions to protect the alpaca population, as well as people's like propensity to be affected, particularly on respiratory infections. So you can see here the different type of early actions that are distributed. So veterinary kits, materials to protect the alpacas, you know, like different kind of things that we do in that window of opportunity between the forecast and before the disaster hits. So this is in general, you know, like the concept. As you can see in this map, this is scaling up in a very large way. We have at the moment around 33 countries in which we're implementing this just within the Red Cross, but beyond the Red Cross in total, it's around like 60 or 70 countries. Alexandra, later you correct me. And one very interesting element of this is that most of those countries where we are developing these systems, they're not necessarily like countries affected by conflict. And if we are actually working on those contexts, we are not really doing early actions in the regions affected by conflict. So that's one of the complexities and the reasons why we're looking into this particular like topic of conflict. And just to finalize, this is just a list of all the partners that are part of this process. There are even more partners at the moment. It is definitely a topic that is growing, and we're very excited to expand this even more to other type of communities, the peace building community, like the community that many of you actually represent. So yeah, with this, thank you very much. Hopefully it's like not very confusing. It's a little bit like clear. If you want more information, Alexandra, which later is gonna introduce you some more information, we'll be very happy to support in any question. But now for the moment, I'm gonna pass over to Lisa. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting. Thanks very much for the presentation and the short insight into this quite complex setup for anticipatory action. Now that Marie, she already posted the link to the paper which Catalina and Marie just published in the chat. So if you want to have a look, you can access it here. But now you would give us some brief insights also into this work which you just finalized already. So Marie, a question to you. What are the main messages of the paper actually? What do you want to bring across?
Just quickly confirm that you can hear me well. You can? Okay, I see some nodding. Perfect. So yes. Thank you very much for the question and also for organizing the session to you and to your whole team, because we really welcome this interest and think that the advances made in recent years on forecast-based action and what we heard now in the session already, that this really proves a point, and that it also should be expanded to situations of conflict to prevent the loss of many more lives and livelihoods than purely reactive humanitarian action ever could. And we all also heard that conflicts are among the main drivers of humanitarian crises. So discussing scaling up FBA forecast-based action towards situations of conflict is definitely a step in the right direction. And what we mainly aim at with this paper is that we want to link different actors from different fields, because we recognize that, of course, this is a very complex endeavor. And we want to encourage different actors to not be paralyzed by this complexity, but to rather strengthen the dialogue and the cooperation among them, because so many different actors from different fields work on these issues, and it just must be linked more strategically. This includes actors from the humanitarian field, the development field, peace building spheres, then also the forecasting community, research institutions, and all of these actors do work on specific elements of this challenge. And they have specific skills and experiences and competitive advantages. And they can learn from each other if they merge their experiences. And for example, there is already a growing literature on linking disaster risk reduction and situation conflict that could also inform inform forecast-based action. And to actually move towards connecting FBA in situations of conflict, we found that it's useful to unpack the challenge to this very complex challenge to smaller, more manageable portions of it.
Thank you very much. Catalina, the next question to you. So what does it actually mean, unpacking the challenge, what Marie just mentioned?
Yeah, so basically this has been like such a fascinating process, because when we started NOLA to develop these forecast-based financing like systems, we were like mainly focusing like peaceful kind of like environment, no, and like conflict definitely was not like part of the process. But then we realized at a certain point, okay, like actually, like people that is more likely to be impacted by climate-related hazards actually are people who live in conflict contexts or that have been affected by conflict. But then on the other side as well, there is the whole element of anticipating the impacts of conflict, no? So we wanted to kind of like explore and say, okay, what do we need to know to move on and be able to do this in this type of environments? So one of the key messages that we transmit in the paper is that, I mean, and it's kind of like obvious, no, like, I mean, we need to build on what we already have, and within the framework of forecast-based action, forecast-based financing, or anticipatory action, there are already a set of like building blocks, no, that are kind of like the key elements to be able to set up these systems. So basically those elements are related to the ones that I mentioned before, like include, no, like the data and forecasting and decision-making capabilities, the early action, like planning, the champions that are part of the process. So there have been actually organizations that and people, not like specific like person, that have been championing like the concept. We have to build kind of like on that knowledge and those processes. Of course, also another element is the financing mechanisms, no, and the exploration of like, I mean, how those existing financing mechanisms could be used in these kind of like complex contexts, or how they have to like change or adapt. And then the last element is the delivery channels, to really think, you know, like how is it possible really to deliver early action under those conditions. So we should definitely build on what already exists in terms of methodologies, experiences, and try to apply this to this context. And then the other element, which is quite interesting when we started to think about this, is that focus-based action in situations of conflict can be seen in two types. So from one side, we're talking about one specific type, which is anticipating hydrometeorological hazards or climate-related hazards in contexts that are already affected by conflict, for people that have been already affected by conflict. And the other track looks more into forecast-based action using conflict prediction to anticipate the impacts of conflict. So it's another dimension to that, and a very complex one, actually. So yeah, those are the ways to unpack this.
That's indeed quite complex. So I'm wondering if you could explain it a little bit in more detail what you actually mean. For example, if you're talking about forecasts and triggers of anticipatory action, what does it mean for track 1, for example, Catalina?
So for let's say that this type 1 or track 1, which is like really looking into climate events happening in a conflict like context, no? So I think there is people from Colombia on the chat. That's a perfect scenario, no? Like, so we have Colombia, a country that has been affected, no, like by conflict, where we have like no like large number of IDP populations. So the question is to look at, no, like, how we could use existing forecasting capabilities at different levels. It could be at national level, at global level, looking at different type of models, existing risk information, to develop that decision-making process in those kind of like type of context. So basically, we will look into the 5 building blocks that were mentioned and try to understand how the complexities of an existing conflict or post-conflict situation require that these building blocks are adapted and changed to really be able to do early action.
Okay, thanks. That's already much clearer. But by the way, if you have questions also, please put it in the chat and we will try to answer it as we go along. So feel free. And now for track 2, same question to you, Marie. What does it actually mean? Could you explain it a little bit in more detail about forecasts and triggers?
Yeah, so the type 2 really focuses on forecast-based action that are based on forecasts of conflict. So the conflict would also trigger the actions. So FBA systems of this time would aim to anticipate emerging or aggravating conflicts, but they would try to prevent and reduce the impacts and the suffering that emerge from these conflict situations. And of course, this comes with several challenges. One of them being that it's actually quite complicated to forecast where conflict will emerge, and given the multi-dimensional aspects of conflict prediction, and then also building on existing conflict prevention methods, which would be a first step to look into what is already out there, is also challenging, since FBA does not necessarily have the same immediate goal as, let's say, traditional conflict prevention, because FBA in this case, aims at mitigating the impact of a disaster and not the hazard itself. So it's really important to understand the aim of this type 2 of FBA in situations of conflict, because conflict, as Catalina already mentioned, does not only create needs in the conflict setting itself, but also elsewhere. For example, when it comes to forced migration or to displacement due to conflicts. So there would, for example, be a conflict which is forecasted, and which is also forecasted that this conflict could trigger displacement. And the actions that address the needs of these displaced populations, or of the host populations hosting these displaced populations in their new location, these actions can be prepared even before the displacement takes place. And this could be something that could be addressed by this type. And the issue or another issue that needs to be addressed is, of course, the political neutrality and other ethical considerations, which are more contested in this type of FBA. And many humanitarian actors fear that it could be too political, or that actions could maybe even be counterproductive and fuel the conflict, which of course wouldn't help. And so discussions about anticipating conflict should not only revolve around, let's say, the sheer technical challenge of gathering and analyzing the amount of data, but also around the implications of decision-making systems that is based on predictions of conflicts. And this is really where all these building blocks become important.
Great. Great. Thanks a lot for the short introduction. I have many more questions, but considering the time, I would maybe hand over to Catalina to switch to the working groups.
Thank you, Lisa. So great, and thank you, Mari, for those insights. So of course, you will be able to find more information in the paper with a lot of the details. But just kind of like checking in some of the questions that that people have raised here on the chat. So I think Ashrafat, you mentioned for instance the Rohingya situation in Bangladesh. It's one of those cases. So you have an IDP population, very particular complex that is very exposed to the monsoon and floods and landslides and so on. So that will be basically the case of the type 1 type of FBA that we are describing. And in terms of your question with regards to the kind of triggering process, so that's definitely one of the complexities on these type of situations, because there are already methodologies that can be generally applied of how to develop these impact forecasting models in a kind of in any context. But one of the issues that we argue actually with Mari in the paper is that there is need for further research and analysis of how these methodologies and triggers should be adapted, potentially changed, given the different kind of complexities of a context of conflict. So there is a lot to research on that regard. So I will, before we move on, I don't know, Lisa, if shall we move directly to the working groups?
Yeah, that would be great, I think.
Okay, good, perfect.
I will share also the Google document, and please add yourself if you would like to be contacted and to stay in touch with us. Please add yourself to the list of participants, and then we'll forward you all the necessary information. Great.
So now it is great that we have a very good forum. We have 34 people in the chat, and we're going to do a very interactive exercise, which I don't know if all of you are familiar with. So it is called actually doctor patient. So the exercise is going to be like this. So I'm going to explain it before you go on your breakout groups. So all of you are going to become doctors because you have a set of expertise, like particularly on the context of like conflict and complexity and different types of like crisis. So we want you to be really absorb that position of being a doctor. In each of your working groups, there are going to be 2 working groups. There is going to be a patient, someone that is like really, really sick and has a serious problem. And this person is going to explain what is that problem. So that person is going to be Alexandra, Ruth in one of the groups, and then myself in the other group. And we're going to basically share with you our problem. We will have 3 minutes to share our problem with you. And then you as doctors will have between 3 to 5 minutes to clarify the problem. So not to give any prescriptions, not to give any recommendations, just to clarify it, the problem, to see if you understand it rightly, if it's concrete enough. And then once it is clear, then we move to the next level. You will have like 10 minutes to be able to give your prescriptions. So that's the moment in which all of you will be able to actually tell solutions. Like, how can we save this patient that is very, very sick? So it will be great that you really let all your ideas like flow. Don't be shy. But if you are very shy, feel free to write directly on the Google Doc. So we will have 2 options. People who want to speak, just speak out in the working group. People who want just to write, feel free just to write down. And then we will see, we will be able to get some like really interesting like feedback. So what I'm gonna do right now is to actually, one second, I'm just gonna make sure all the working groups are good. So basically everybody is gonna go into a random group. We're not selecting like specifically who goes to what. So I'm just making sure that we have Alexandra is in working group number 1 with Mary, and then I'm gonna be in working group number 2 with Lisa. Great. So see you in around 20 minutes. Have fun in the working groups. I'm just sending you right now. Good. So you just need to click on accepting. Great. I can see everybody's just going.
Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for Catalina. I think she just makes sure that everyone is in the right session or going to the breakout session now. So if you like, you can open your video. It's also nice to see you. We're a small group. I know a couple of you already, so hi. Hi, everyone. Hi. So just to highlight again, we are actually in track 1, which means anticipating hydrometeorological hazards in conflict situations. So we already have kind of the FBF methodology and now want to expand it to conflict contexts. And Catalina will explain her problem in a bit as the patient.
Hey everyone, sorry for the wait. I was just making sure that the breaking room was like, it was all okay. Good. So yeah, perfect. So I'm excited. So please feel free to write your name on the collaborative note-taking document. So we make sure that we can share with you information afterwards. But of course, yeah, like if you don't want to write your name, no worries, no problem. Good, so this is like perfect. So I'm gonna kickstart. So Lisa and me, we're gonna team up to do the doctor-patient exercise. I guess Matthias, you're also an expert on this exercise. You have done it before, so you help me out. But yeah, so basically, I mean, in theory, like just to go back, a recap of the exercise, of the methodology. So I'm going to share with you a very particular problem that we are facing, that we are encountering. You will have then the time to clarify the question. So don't give any solutions, just clarify, just to make sure that everything is like very clear. And then afterwards, then we will have all the time for you to give all your ideas and give you recommendations. This is quite important. As Matthias mentioned earlier, this is an emerging topic. It is something that we really want to like invest in terms of like research and practice. So basically all the ideas that are coming up from the session will be very, very important for us. So don't be shy and share with us, like all your ideas. So okay, so I'm gonna start. Lisa, you time me if I'm gonna pass the time. So basically, the situation is like this. In the Red Cross and Red Crescent, we have been doing forecast-based action in 33 countries, but all of those contexts are peaceful contexts, let's say, like not really on conflict areas. Like we haven't really implemented like anything there because, of course, like the complexities are very big and the fear of acting like is very high. And there are many considerations that we don't necessarily have considered. So the key like problems that we have is that we need to do forecast-based action or anticipatory action for hydrometeorological hazards in countries affected by conflict, and for particularly to protect people that has been affected by conflict, like IDPs, refugees, migrants, and so on. All the variety of people affected by conflict, including like host communities and so on. So we actually want to do it. In the next few years, that is like a humanitarian imperative. Probably you have heard the ICRC released just a month ago a very important report about the link between climate change and conflict, and it really focuses particularly on how people affected by conflict is more likely to be impacted by climate impacts. And it really shows basically that there is a humanitarian imperative to be able to set up climate change adaptation strategies at all different time scales, like to protect population in these settings. So that's basically the context in general. So my problem is that we haven't done it yet. We need to do it. What do we need to do to be able to do it? What are the considerations that we need to have to be able to do this in this context? Good. So now it's time for you to clarify questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself and have a chat.
I guess the one important thing is to have a clear sense of the timeline in which you are doing both the integration of humanitarian and post-humanitarian engagement, because one thing has to be with the other, right? If it's a humanitarian, then it's a whole different framework, OCHA, ICRC, and everything. And a lot of the resilience comes actually from the engagement that goes into the development timeline, different funding, different frameworks. So what is the timeline in which we're working here with?
Very important, Diego. So my timeline is this one. So I'm talking about hydrometeorological hazards ranging from droughts, which could be, we're talking about seasonal level. So I want to implement a system that will allow me to take seasonal forecast information, but then also short-term forecast. It could be, like as short as actions, like that could be implemented 10 days before, 5 days before, 3 days before the hazard. So that is in terms of the timeline for the implementation of the actions itself, no, like based on the forecast. However, no, like you mentioned the element of like kind of long-term investment, and that's very important because I cannot have a focus-based financing on action system to be able to act in that short time if there is no long-term investment, because this is about also hydrometeorological investment, risk investment, and that's more a development. You know, like that's where the things get kind of like mixed. So,
but Catalina, if I may, from point zero onwards, you have to define short-term and long-term for the investment, but to have a clear baseline on which you have the actuarial framework or the actuarial data setting that allows you to prepare and to determine what is the variance and what is the change. That's also retro data back into past, and how far into past are you going to dig? That's one important element as well, because we work on climate security for agriculture, and if you're going to build an insurance mechanism for that, is at what point do we still having changes that are rare and that are difficult to handle? Which point was the basic one? It's like the second rain season on banana air plantations in the northern part of Colombia is out of balance, is out of pattern, and that's the one you want to spot on.
Exactly. That's such an important part, because that's exactly part of what I was mentioning before, kind of like the design of the triggering element, no, like, which actually has to look at that kind of like, yeah, the past. No, like we really need to look at that historical process of, no, like how have been the different impacts across a very large scale of time, to really, for us to understand what are all these, like what we call like threshold points, you know, like at which point, no, like these indicators are telling me that there is an X or Y impact is very likely. But that is definitely what you are saying, really looks at the long term. Excellent. Good. Like, so I hope that the questions was somehow clarified. Yeah, please go ahead. Who else wants to join?
I would maybe try to just ask a short clarification using the big concepts. We had time, I use space. Where are we? Is it that we are in a conflict context and do the early action on drought, or are we somewhere where we believe a conflict context in our neighboring country can influence the situation? So are we in conflict or next to conflict but impacted by conflict?
That's very, very good point. We actually wrote a line specifically about that on the report, Matthias, because sometimes there is a blurry line between that. So, I mean, in theory, when we talk about this type 1, we're talking about the particular context of conflict, no, like the state that has been affected by conflict. But of course, it's tricky because we're also talking about the people that has been affected by conflict. And this could be perfectly a refugee that is in the next country, which is not in the country affected by conflict, but no, like just next door. So, but that's mostly that, you know, like looking really into like who has been impacted, who has been affected. But that complexity of what you were saying, when you know, like you have the two things converging, no, like, which is the hydrometeorological event, but at the same time, maybe the next country is in a very complex situation, and then you have an influx of migrants or refugees. Then you have the two things happening at the same time, which actually happened in Colombia. No, like Diego, you might know even better, like the whole situation with the Venezuela crisis. So you have an event on the north of Colombia with a kind of like an increase of like potential of like drought, and then on the top you have the migrants from Venezuela like coming. So you have these two things at the same time, which is the extreme complexity.
But
Thank you.
If I may, that is when the frameworks of OCHA become a little bit more political, because that it takes you exactly into the area of what's it called, a complex emergency, which is different triggers, different frameworks, and so it's and it's good because you have clear early disbursement, but it's difficult because then it kind of silo things in terms of the preparations for the long term or for the forecasting, so that you prevent conflict and problems. That's a framework that makes it very difficult if you let complex emergencies slip in. because it's a whole different angle that we need to deal with.
Good point, Diego, definitely. Yeah. Good. So somebody else would like to I guess, Lisa, we have like 1 more minute for clarifying questions.
Maybe also the question what the setting is that we're in. So if it's like an urban or rural setting, or what the situation on the ground is like, if there are pre-existing vulnerabilities.
Good, yeah, good point, Fabian. So we're talking about across different geographies. I mean, I guess this doesn't really limit anticipatory action for either for a urban situation or a rural situation. In the Red Cross, we are looking anywhere. Where the impacts of the hydrometeorological hazard, of course, in conjunction with the with other like risk elements, could happen. And this could be in a city, this could be in a rural area, this could be anywhere. And in terms of the pre-existing vulnerabilities, that's definitely one of the key elements, because that's the whole point. We kind of like understand that people affected by conflict have particular circumstances of vulnerability and capacities and so on, that should be considered into the kind of like understanding of the process. Good, excellent. Any other question? No, all clear? Perfect. So I think we can move on to the prescription moment. So now that you kind of like clarified and have an idea of like what do we want to do in the Red Cross, and what are our what is our problem, it would be great to hear your ideas. I mean, what should we consider? What definitely are elements that we shouldn't miss? Anything that comes to your mind across all the different elements, not only on the forecasting and kind of triggering decision making, but about funding, about actions, about anything that you consider important. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I would start. So we talked a bit about triggers and sort of the historical impact analysis and all the background knowledge you have to build solid triggers. And you have to build on your understanding of impact as well. So you have to have dynamic vulnerability criteria that allow you to say that the forecast means this impact in this region. Now, in a conflict setting, we talk about very dynamic vulnerability criteria. So the context changes really quickly. So we would have to know what that means for the people we want to reach. So how can we have select criteria that allow us to understand the impact that's changing so quickly due to the rapid changing of the context? So what that means for the people we're trying to reach. And then also what does that mean for us in our operation as, I guess, humanitarian actor? So how does access change? How quickly, how feasible are early actions based on the rapidly changing situation? So I guess it's a bit more a different speed of analysis you have to do maybe in comparison to a context where you're not dealing with conflict, I think.
Great, Elena. That's very good point. I think that's definitely, we have that as one of the questions within the paper in relation to like access and security considerations. Cool.
I would like maybe to add just very short, I agree with all of that, and the complexity and the dynamics of these situations, I think they need maybe a slightly different decision-making way, which includes maybe scenario-based decisions a bit more than the automated trigger-based decisions, more local expertise, group discussion, and so on. I think this is something that we have to include more than we had to do it in the hydromet forecasting.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matthias. It's quite interesting because for many of you that are not familiar with our current systems, they're kind of like very like rigid in a way. So it's a hard trigger, like you kind of like implement, boom, and the funding is dispersed. But that aspect of what you were saying of the potential of combining like that hard trigger with a soft trigger that is more consensus based. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the key issues that we should definitely explore. Which, for your information, for many of you here, like organizations like the START Network, they do have that consensus based type of process for anticipatory action. So yeah, that's quite interesting area. Good, more ideas.
Maybe also to what extent this has an effect on implementing or drafting standard operating procedures, because as you said, for how you call it, hydrometeorological events, it's kind of solid or kind of fixed, so you can to some extent at least say, okay, once this happens we can do this and this and this, and the situation is a bit more clear. Whereas in the conflict setting, it's so unpredictable and human behavior can change so rapidly that how do you even produce a standard operating procedure based on that? So what is the effect on, what's the effect of the conflict setting on the ability for an organization to draft a standard operating procedure based on the, as Arlene already said, the changing situation, the changing dynamics of the situation?
That's a very good point, and I think that's going to be a hard one for us in the Red Cross, because normally we are creating what we call early action protocols, which is like pretty much the same as a standard operational procedure, which is very detailed in a way, you know. Like, so we say these are the actions that we are going to do, these are the risks that we want to reduce, you know, like the kind of like the whole process. Like, okay, this is like an elevated version of contingency planning, like to the next level. But I agree with you that in this kind of like complex, flexibility is the key. And I think that's something that internally we will need to kind of like change and figure out how to adapt. Dominic also had another comment. So he said that this is not limited to conflict settings, but it would be important to consider cascading hazards and effects. 100%. Like, this is just such an important thing, because it is not only, it is not only about the let's say the forecast of the rainfall, but then all the different cascading hazards, which could be from a mudslide, a landslide, and so on and so on. And then having all those elements into the decision-making process add an extra layer of complexity that is quite, is a challenging one. But yeah, very good point.
But Catalina, does it remain to be a challenge still to try to connect institutional / political frameworks with nature-based frameworks? Because on one is very, you know, it comes down to how talented and how much of an intuition the political officers have to spot where that thing is going. But on the hydrological one, if the homework is done, you have a good framework that is kind of undisputable. So, I mean, if you take, for instance, the tsunami in Indonesia, all over the Southeast Asia part, you had a tsunami. That was a natural element, but when you had to deal with Banda Aceh, you had a political element. And so the two sides were not exactly dealing in the same way. And that is the problem, because at the end, we need this framework to connect with the political interface so that people in the Security Council can say if the end of the world is coming or not, and take action on that particular framework. That is what we are after as well. And that seems to me like is a connection in which we haven't yet had developed the suitable interface. Because for what you're giving me as a framework, what would be the equivalent? The International Crisis Group, green, yellow, red indicators? We don't know. And Security Council is reactive. They don't have proactive engagements in this area. So what is there?
That is like such a good point, like Diego. And actually, we don't know, like exactly. You know, these are the kind of like from one side, from a research perspective, like the research questions that we need to dig down and kind of like understand like much better. Because in a normal context, like all the work that we have been doing in these 33 countries, I mean, it's complex as well, but it's in a way it's very straightforward, no? So there is a very well understanding of the different institutions, that are kind of like are part of the design process, from the hydromet departments, statistical offices, and so on and so on. But of course, in these, in this kind of conflict affected a context, it will be a whole set of new actors. It will be a whole set of like additional elements on the framework. So definitely, I mean, yeah, we welcome you actually a lot of your feedback into this process that we are starting on.
But then we have something. I mean, if you look at actors such as ICG or maybe even Adelphi, what Janan is doing, CIPRI, and all, they all have the political mapping somehow. We're still missing how to put it into a spectrum of this is red, this is yellow, this is green, and this is bad, and this is going worse. We're still missing that. But it's because we are too dependent on single causalities, on provable causalities. If you use complexity theory, if we just conceive the whole thing as a system in which the system works and that's optimal state, something breaks, it's going bad, it doesn't really have a major impact if it's because it's raining too much or because people are just fighting. At the end of the day, system is not optimal, so time to act. And that is a way to connect the two frameworks. That's what we're trying to see if a climate center on your side works with other people and the science as well, because we need to achieve that one single systemic perception of where we're going to deal with. That we need to do.
I love that you mentioned that, because this is exactly with the whole concept of impact-based forecasting that we have been promoting. Like we're kind of like getting to that point of really understanding all these different, like causalities and kind of like complexities into the decision-making process, and looking into not only the hydromet kind of like indicator in isolation, but in combination with these other elements. So that is like, there is some work definitely kind of like on that area, but it is not yet on the conflict aspect. So at least this is for the climate center and in general for the federation. And it is one of the areas that we need to understand better, and we need to include that into our system. It is not yet. So like for a clear example, there is absolutely no inclusion of what you were saying, like Adelphi type of like risk monitoring or ICG. There is no yet, not even ICRC related information yet into these systems. So this is kind of like the next level where we are kind of like heading towards. So yeah, so there is opportunity for a lot of collaboration in this area.
Maybe two short comments from my side on that, because I think that's really exciting and interesting to discuss it, and I think we need to see what we want to achieve with these forecastings, and I think it's two different or two things to achieve the forecasting of conflict impacts and the forecasting of conflicts to prevent conflicts, which both would be great if we can do it. But I think with the forecasting of impacts, we are a bit closer already. And then one of the learnings, I think, from the START network at one point was that we really need to kind of add in elements that help us to manage uncertainty, because in these complex situations there's always something not going as expected and as modeled. So I think there was one of the examples where the anticipation window of the START fund had activation for, what was it? I think returnees to Afghanistan or something like that. And there was a condition on it that it was activated. You could prepare, but on the condition that it will happen, so that all the processes already went on. And then in the end, it was very little cost and effort to take it back, and they took it back and they paid back in the end, but it already kind of there was a first step of activation. And I think these kind of different steps and other elements to manage uncertainty will be very important in these more complex setups.
So thank you, Matthias. With that last intervention, I think we need to go back again to our our main group, because everybody is waiting for us there. But thank you so much, like Diego. Those ideas that you have like written here are like super important. We will add them definitely into the Google document, and it will be great to have a follow up with you. And Nora, you also had a question about the audience, so we can address now in the main group that as well. But for the moment, thank you very much. I'm going to close the room and see you in the other side. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
but Hannah, that's a very relevant question, I would say. And maybe we can share some of the FBF experience. So Catalina, Hannah's question was, how can you convince governments to invest in forecast-based action for or in conflict settings if you don't have really a proof that it's working, if you don't have this basis of evidence?
Yeah, good, very good point. So, I mean, do you want me to address?
Yeah.
So basically, this is, I mean, so this has been actually, you know, like Alexandra, you know, like you and me that have been working on this for so many years. Like, this is definitely one of the key areas where we have been like investing the most, like evidence-based, you know, like how do we guarantee that every time we have an activation, you know, like there is a really robust evaluation, that is a really in-depth analysis of like what was the difference, like what, and not only from a cost perspective, but from a kind of like humanitarian impact perspective. So we have been trying to do that. We have built the evidence already, like in, for instance, activations we have done in Bangladesh and Mongolia, in Peru. So it's like, it's happening in normal context. So now we're talking about this evidence for a conflict settings. I think we will need to apply the same model. I mean, it is a way of like implementing and being able to kind of like test after an implementation. So I think we will continue the same type of model in this, no, like once we have the systems and the capacity to be able to set up a focus-based action in this context. There are other ways, of course, to build the evidence, but more theoretically speaking, that we're working on as well. So it will be a combination of both. Good, hopefully that's clear, Hannah. Good. So now, Lisa, where are you? Oh, there you are. Good. So Lisa, what are we doing now?
So we still have, let's say, 18 minutes. So we would do a short reporting back of the breakout groups. Me and Marie would do that, and then we'll proceed to the closing statement. Actually, Alexandra would give it to us. So in this case, I would start very quickly. In the end, I would say there are still many things which need to be clarified. First of all, for the other group also. So we were dealing with anticipating hydrometeorological hazards in conflict situations. So we already have the experience from non-conflict settings, now to expand it to conflict situations. And then what are critical considerations humanitarian actors should consider and apply to conduct early actions in conflict contexts. So in very brief, there are many open questions, but the main challenge is, I would say from my perspective, that we have a very dynamic situation and quickly changing, and also vulnerabilities changing, population movement and different kind of aspects. At the same time, we still have a quite rigid standard operating procedure at the moment. So we need to adapt this, and there are also already possibilities how to do this. For example, scenario planning, for example, consensus-based triggering, like it is done with the START network also. So we have some experiences, but I would say should try new ones. And then a second aspect, which is quite difficult, is on the one hand the technical and the political aspects of these things, because as soon as you move into conflict, of course, it's highly political, and you can't, especially as a humanitarian actor, of course, I mean, as from a peace building perspective, you're more familiar, let's say, with this context, but from a humanitarian perspective, you always try to stick to the 7 principles, of course, and it's getting more and more complex. So please, from the group also, if you would like to highlight other points, please go ahead. Those were my 2 main takeaways.
Good, no more comments from the group? Good, so yeah, so we can have pass to Mary. You want to report back on the other group?
Yes. So we also spent some time in really clarifying what the two different types are about, and I think this also highlights again that those of us, we are in the starting chutes, like, and the discussions have to continue. And we said, or Alexandra also presented that thinking through this entire problem statement at first and everything you've already done to forecast-based action wasn't easy, and no donor wanted to fund action without knowing how this will actually really have a humanitarian impact. And it took 3 years to only have a somewhat solid system, so that takes time, and it's good that we're having a starting point now. And she also reiterated that what helped is really bringing different actors together, for example, during the forecast-based financing dialogue platforms, to really help moving this forward. And we also talked about which different actors and which different analyses are already done, and that this is somehow not really coming through to the humanitarian sphere, and or that it could be linked in a more obvious way, and that more people could be talking about it. I think what we also talked about, let me have a look at my notes. Yeah, we clarified that there are different methods of approaching this, and that one that we suggest in the paper is to think about what are the hazards that trigger the action, and that we have two different types here: the hydrometeorological disasters triggering action in type 2, and the conflict triggering the action, the forecast-based action in type 2. And then there was another comment that, of course, it has to be taken into consideration that if conflict is involved, then maybe also the government or other actors that are responsible, for example, information systems in different institutions, that due to conflict, it can be difficult to have instruments available because they might be exacerbated as well. So this was also something that we discussed, and yeah, and so I posted again the link for the paper in the group, and where we formulated all of these research questions for both types and for all of the building blocks for FBA, and to not only leave you with questions and problem statements, we included concrete advice for next steps for the different actors involved, so that you can have a look and see how you can become a champion of FBA in conflict situations. For example, we very much encourage donors to fund more research and to allow their budgets to be used flexibly. And we want to encourage implementers to share their experiences, as we said, and researchers to work together with other research areas and mix their methods, as many fields are involved here. So please have a look, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any feedback or further questions. And also talking to group number 2, if there's anything to add to the discussion, please feel free to speak now.
Good, no comments? Okay, so with that, thank you, Marie, that was great. So now to finalize, we just have like a few minutes left, so I'm gonna actually hand over to Alexandra Ruth, which is the head of the Anticipation Hub, and she's gonna kind of like share with us, kind of like wrap up all this discussion and talk about the role of this Anticipation Hub in all this process. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Catalina. So basically, we told you in the introduction that we are working since around 6 years on forecast-based financing. And this was really focusing on extreme weather events. So setting up the system, getting different actors and stakeholders involved, really making the case that this can work. And as Catalina mentioned, we have now around, we are with different stakeholders, so UN, NGOs, Red Cross, Red Crescent. We are in around 60 countries. And I heard recently that it's around 108 different projects or initiatives. Due to that fact that this is growing so much, and we, together with the Federal Foreign Office, and we are very grateful for this long-term support, we thought that it would make so much sense to start an anticipation hub. And this is not only an online platform, which is going online, I hope, beginning of November, but it's as well a network of forecast-based action practitioners, policymakers, scientists. We were really lucky to establish the last 5 years in our conferences called dialogue platforms. So the Anticipation Hub is basically around 3 main elements. So it's about learning, exchange, and innovation. So really to provide local actors, humanitarian practitioners, policymakers with learning and exchange, and to still continue innovating as well. Then it's about policy and advocacy, so concrete materials for good policy and advocacy work to convince more and more people that this makes a lot of sense, and guidance and support, but yeah, I would say not only on technical level, but really to support the different actors in moving that forward. The next slide, please, Lisa. So yeah, thank you, Lisa. We can see it now. So I told you the Anticipation Hub, it's currently under development. So we are in a design phase. We had a scoping study earlier this year. We are not yet online, but we are trying really to bring different stakeholder groups already together in events like this one. We have a forecast-based financing website where you can find news and events and different articles on different countries. We are very present as well on LinkedIn and Twitter, so join our channels and to get relevant information. And we hope to be able to invite you to a launch event then beginning of November. Next slide, please. The global dialogue platforms I mentioned already, so the next one is end of October, so feel free to get in contact with us if you are interested. Asia is then mid-November, and the global dialogue platform December. The big advantage this year, or I don't know if it's an advantage, but it's all virtual, so a lot of people can join. The last slide, Lisa, please. So what is important to mention is the Anticipation Hub, it's clearly focusing still a lot on our work around forecast-based financing. Nevertheless, we think that anticipation, it's a much broader field, and there is so much potential to really change the humanitarian system. And that's why we would like to engage as well in so-called emerging topics, and anticipation in conflict, or and conflict, to leave it open, could be one emerging topics, but there are others as well, like for example epidemics and anticipation, and if we brainstorm, I think we can come up with many other topics. So we really would like to invite you to join. I mean, the working group is not established yet, but if we feel like there is an interest and there are stakeholders who want to engage, then we really would start a working group on this very important topic. And as always, I mean, what we did the last years, we really want to have broad range of different stakeholders in the room to get all the different discussions on all the different relevant angles around this topic. Yeah, thanks a lot. Ashraf is just mentioning in the chat that Forwarn has done a dengue anticipation in Bangladesh this year. And so this somehow highlights as well that really different actors are starting to work as well on different topics to reduce humanitarian impact. That's it from my side. Over to you, Catalina or Lisa.
Great, thank you, Alex. So yeah, so we're actually almost reaching our time. I think what we could do maybe in the next like 2 minutes before close is that if there is any like pressing question or comment that any of you have, please feel free either to unmute yourself or write a question on the chat. Yeah, before we close the session. So please go ahead and unmute yourself and share anything you want.
I was just thinking of, like, as we are very much in a collaborative way to move forward with the anticipation. Can we design some sort of like very dynamic platform or website where we come to know, like, these are the issues that we are discussing right now and who is doing what kind of things, so that it will be more collaborative effort to do very small work but very nice work that can be scaled up at different scale, different places, with the German Red Cross, with Climate Center, Start Network, so wherever. So we can be very open on that things. Just
yeah, very good question. So in fact, this is the objective of the Anticipation Hub. So when we go online, we will have a map where we will have all the different initiatives hopefully available. So we will have like a country page where we shortly explain who are the different anticipation actors in country, but then as well project sites for the different initiatives. We are working hard on that. The second point you mentioned was more on the networking part, so really bringing people together. I'm not fully sure if we really can have until the launch date this working group or these exchange platforms already established, but that is really one of the key elements we would like to provide to the anticipation network, because we feel like the platforms are key for this success. So we need something in between, you know, we have platforms once a year or twice a year, but in between we need to connect these different actors, be it on regional level, but as well for certain topics like for working in drought. It would be very important as well to connect people on global level. Thanks a lot for this question.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks, Ashrat, for your question. So yeah, we have 1 more minute for any last comment or question.
Actually, I would have something if no one else wants to go ahead. Because I just remembered also the comment from our group discussion on cascading effects. So we kind of have also the dilemma a little bit that in disaster risk reduction, we move towards a multi-hazard approach. And in anticipatory action, we're still on the single hazard approach in a way. So I was also wondering how this could be actually integrated in terms of forecasting, and then basically different triggers on impacts, but more on the impacts towards basically the population affected, not so much the trigger of the hazard itself. So just if you have any thinking in this direction already, it would be interesting.
So I would say that definitely a lot of thinking on that direction. Think like the recent guide that we launched, the impact forecasting guide, addressed some of those like elements. So at the moment it's clear, like the systems that we are setting up are for specific hazards. No, like, so we look, no, like the impacts of particular cold waves or the impacts of heat waves, of floods, and so on. There is an element, of course, of analysis of cascading hazard for some of them. Like when we look particularly at cyclones, we're looking not only into like a wind speed, but also kind of like floods. So there are elements of it, but definitely, I mean, this is an area that continue being. I mean, that needs to continue further develop. But even within the multi-hazard early warning system community, this is not like, is still a topic that is evolving. So yeah, that's definitely have to be analyzed. Thank you, Lisa, for that.
Another emerging topic.
Yeah. Good. So I think if there are no other comments, unless there is a last pressure, no? Okay, no. So yeah, so we want to thank you very much on behalf of the Anticipation Hub and GPPI and the German Foreign Office. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. I know you must, for many of you that are not totally familiar with the topic, you might have a lot of questions. So please feel free to reach out to Alexandra, to me, to Lisa anytime. And we really look forward to continue, collaborating with many of you. And thank you so much. Yeah, all the best. Alex, you want to say last word?
Bye. Thanks a lot. Very interesting.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.